Welcome to Well Since You Asked Me, the podcast where curiosity sparks conversation. I'm Lynn, your host. In this special Easter episode, I'm joined by Cheryl, a former counselor turned spiritual companion, for a heartfelt conversation about joy. Not as a fleeting feeling, but as a spiritual grounding. We explore how joy can anchor us through pain, change, and uncertainty, and what it means to truly listen for God's voice. It's a tender, transformative reminder that joy isn't the absence of struggle, it's the presence of something deeper. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's get into it. All right, thank you so much for joining me today, right ahead of Easter Sunday. Let's start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself and how you embarked on this journey of spiritual joy.
Well, joy has been a big focus for me lately. As I think I shared with you, I've been been training to become a spiritual director. And that's been part of my life for the last couple of years. And my final project is to be a paper. And so I've chosen to write about spiritual direction and joy. I really don't like direction. It's really more of a spiritual companion. It's someone who accompanies a person who's interested in deepening their relationship with God. That's what a spiritual director companion is. So I've just been thrilled with reading about joy. I've read one of the best books is the Book of Joy, which was written by the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And it is full of Buddhist and Christian practices about joy. It looks at obstacles to joy, what are pathways to joy, what are joy practices. And it's been a joy to read the book.
Yeah.
And I just felt like the premise and kind of primary focus of my paper is how I think it's important for spiritual companions to nurture and cultivate their own joy so that they can be a non-anxious, peaceful, joyful presence for the people that we meet with. And so that's the main premise. There's a little bit about lingering with folks as they have either mountaintop experiences or joyful experiences, and you want to kind of deepen those experiences with them and help them kind of mine those a little bit more. So I started doing this programming, this training a couple years ago. I retired, it'll be 3 years ago in May. I can't even believe I'm retired that long. But I was burned out with mental health. As you know, I was a clinical social worker for about 45 years. And the last 30 was spent in a private practice doing counseling. And so I was a little burned out on mental health. I'd been also working on a community project for mental health here in Manor. And we're really focused on youth and their mental health issues. And I just thought, I need a break from that. And so the community is important to me. I love having lunch with girlfriends. Yeah. A friend of mine was a spiritual director. She said, I really think with your retirement, you might want to think about doing this training. And she said, I think this would be a good match for you. So I investigated. I thought, that's right. And I have been very passionate about it. It's been a wonderful course of study, even if I never see anybody else again. It's meant a lot to me to just have the spaciousness to learn more deeply about my own spiritual journey, and then how might I be an instrument for God? How I might be present with someone as they investigate their own journey. So that's where I've been the last few years. To back it up a bit, I'm a lifelong Methodist. My family was mom, dad, a younger sister. Church was the center of the center of our lives, really socially. We were church on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday. We had our fellowship dinner, and there's another service and choir practice. So this is where our social life was, and it was very meaningful to me growing up. And then went off to college, and like a lot of kids, I went to church for a little bit, but it was more out of, I don't know, just habit, superstition. I really it didn't have a lot of meaning for me at that point. But then when I was 19, my father died by suicide.
Mm.
And that sent me spiraling, as
Mm-hmm.
it would anyone.
Yes.
Uh, it was a very difficult time. It was a shocking thing. It was in 1970, so quite taboo. And it sent my family reeling. It was like, we've been good people. Why is this
Mm-hmm.
happening to us? This is shocking. We've been good Christians and we've tried to walk the path. And, why does this kind of thing happen? And so, fortunately for me, 3 weeks before my dad died, I had my first date with my husband of almost
Oh,
52 years, Dr. Randolph Bias.
yes.
And he had a very insightful roommate who
Mm.
said, "You love this girl, right?" And he goes, "Right." He says, "Well, we need to get up a group of people and go over there and be with her during the funeral." And
Mm-hmm.
we were at Florida State. I had grown up in Jacksonville. It's quite a drive to go from Tallahassee to Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
But they got a bunch of roommates together. They didn't get there in time for the funeral, but they did rescue me from a house
Mm-hmm.
of despair.
Yeah.
Scooped me up, went to the beach. We had a lovely walk on the beach, and that sealed our relationship, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. And we laugh about this, but he sent me a telegram. Back in the day, that's how you communicated quickly sometimes. And it said, "To understand is to care." And it was just like, we don't know what that means, but I tell you what, it
It's
anchored our
yeah.
relationship. It was
Yes.
so kind and sweet and loving. And his father had died when he was 7, so
Mm.
he knew a little bit about grief and sorrow, and he was certainly there for me. But skip ahead to went to grad school. I graduated from Florida State with a degree in social work. I had already declared that major before anything happened with my
Mm-hmm.
dad. But every paper, every talk I gave from undergraduate to graduate school had to do with suicide
Mm.
because I was really trying to find out and learn more about why that happened for
Yes.
my dad. And of course, I entered into therapy and had the last semester of grad school was tough. It was all
Mm-hmm.
classes before we did an internship. And I developed insomnia, and it was crazy making, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness for a good therapist who helped me kind of really walk through this whole journey of uh, grief and loss and
Mm-hmm.
change. And he also had some spiritual inclinations. And so helped me to begin to make some sense of this through the years. This was a long time therapeutic process. There also came out a book, and I don't know when it was published, but it was called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was written by Rabbi Harold Kushner. And he presented an image of God not as a punitive puppeteer God zapping this person or that and making bad things happen, but as a suffering God. And I tell you what, that was a 180 for me. I then, given the support of my pastor and this therapist, I could really yell at God, wrestle with God, and get kind of down in the weeds and really kind of battle it out with God as to why this had happened to me and our family, and what was it in my dad's life that led to this. So that book was pivotal, and then I went on to have a career in mostly medical social work at the beginning of my life, my career life, which was, all those learning experience jobs that you have.
Yes.
One of my first jobs was
Doing it.
we had moved from Austin to New Jersey, our 3 years of purgatory, we call it. But that's where the jobs were for Randolph when he got out of his PhD program. And he wanted to be in academia, but there weren't academic jobs. So there was a corporate job, and there were a group of grad school friends that lived in New Jersey and had jobs at Bell Labs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we moved there for 3 years. Our oldest son was born there. And it was, I had a job as a pediatric social worker in a hospital,
Mm-hmm.
which meant I covered the intensive care nursery and
Mm-hmm.
the pediatric unit and any ER pediatric cases that needed a social worker. And that was a really challenging job. And but it was a good learning experience for me. And anyway, after that particular job, we moved back to Austin in '84. We'd been there 3 years, and I began working in a rehab center in Austin,
Mm-hmm.
doing physical rehab, and that taught me at an early age. I was probably in my mid 30s that I saw all these patients who they'd never traveled, they hadn't spent their, any money on travel, and they retired and they were going to see the world, and one person had a heart attack or a stroke, and they weren't going to be able to do that anymore. So I began to talk more about let's travel, let's do stuff now. It's almost like let's retire now and work later, because later we need to be close to the bathrooms and doctors. You know what I mean? Now, while we've got our health and energy, we need to travel. And so we really lived that. And fortunately, my husband had a job where he traveled to various conventions and so forth, and we got to travel a lot because of his work situations. But that was also an important time. I always knew I wanted to do private practice. That was always one of my career goals. And when I turned 40, a series of things happened at my workplace, and I was able to leave that workplace. Well, actually, I was invited to leave that workplace. I had worked at a job in a hospital that was more clinically focused with the support of my boss. And then at the last minute, he said, you're not going to be able to do that. I need you to go back to case management. And I said no. And he said no. And we parted ways. And it was probably one of the best things that happened to me. In the moment, I was furious with him because that was my solid income. But it was probably the kick I needed to get out and do private practice. And I grew that over the years. Fortunately, I had a husband with a solid salary, and I could do that. That was, he's always been very supportive of whatever I want to do. And we've had this, we're best friends, and we're so respectful and supportive of each other. He was not happy in his job, and I supported him through that. And we've done that back and forth several times. So that is really, really an important piece. We ultimately had a second son. We have two adult sons. Our older son lives in California with his wife and our about to be 1-year-old granddaughter.
Oh.
Her birthday's Easter Sunday. And then and he's a physician, and our younger son is an attorney, lives in Plano, and is married and has a 6-year-old daughter and an almost 2-year-old son. So they all bring so much joy, and family time has always been important. And they've wanted to stay in the family, which, doesn't have to happen. So that has been wonderful.
Yeah.
And I would say,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, one of the things I forgot to say, when we first moved to Austin in 1973, after we got married, we knew one couple in town. They were going to be here a week before they moved back to Florida to go to school.
Oh, wow.
They introduced us, showed us all around Austin, and they introduced us to University United Methodist Church. And that became a real anchor for us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our community was.
Yeah.
We made lots of friends there. And then we later in the mid 90s moved to another very progressive Methodist church downtown.
Yeah.
And that's our Sunday school class, the people in that group. We've been together for 40 years. We've raised each other, raised our babies and our grandbabies together.
Mm-hmm.
And so community has been so important to us. Spiritually, I had a moment before I went into private practice where I really considered going to seminary.
Mm.
I was having lunch with a friend. Again, I love having lunch with friends.
Yeah.
And she said, I said, I don't know that I really want to do that, but I'm really drawn spiritually to do something more with my, social work skills. And she said, it really sounds like you would enjoy this lay ministry program, which is called, it was through the Episcopal Church. It's called Education for Ministry. It was a 4-year program. And it was basically you went to seminary, but you did it in a lay-led group.
Mm.
And we studied the Old Testament one year, the New Testament the next. We did all kinds of studies of different theologians, philosophers, had to do a spiritual autobiography each year and to kind of grow spiritually. So that was really important. I decided not to go to seminary after all. But when I went to private practice, it was, we were taught in grad school not to bring in anything spiritual
Oh,
when we
interesting.
talked to clients. But I had a really close friend and another supervisor who
Mm.
we felt it was important if that was something that was important to a client and they wanted to bring spirituality in. So we began meeting, the three of us, for several years on, how were we going to do that and how to approach that. It was, this was in the 90s when that was just not
Mm.
done. I mean, now it's an integral part of doing therapy,
Right.
but then it was kind of new and different. So spirituality, my own spiritual growth has always been really important to me. And I began when my older son was a senior in high school. I had an associate pastor at my church who had become a trained spiritual director. And I thought his senior year, I knew I was probably going to have some emotional and spiritual
Mm.
issues with launching him. So we began to do individual spiritual direction together. It was basically just an hour a month where we could kind of unpack things that were happening, not only in my life, but just spiritually, and how to be more focused on that. And I did that for a number of years. I did it in a group and individually with not only that pastor, but a couple of nuns
Mm.
and another woman associated with the Catholic Church. And that began to be really an important element of uh, just my personal life. So there was the individual growth through therapy. I'm still doing therapy. I've done therapy kind of off and on, just depending, and doing my own spiritual direction, and then now launching into hopefully passing my training to become a
Sure you
spiritual
will.
director
I love
of
that. Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. There's a couple of things that I heard that I wanted to explore with you. Um, like right now, there's a lot that's going on politically, obviously, and
Yep.
there's a lot of people that are steeped in trauma. And it comes from different sources. So depending on who you are, you're going to have and experience different trauma. I heard through your story that you've had some traumatic events, but you've always been able to hold on to your spirituality and then find joy out of that. Can you walk me through a little bit of how that works? Because you could take different path and just be in that trauma and that sadness.
Well, and I'm remembering a quote from Archbishop Tutu in the Book of Joy. He says, "You can come through a traumatic experience either embittered or ennobled." Love the juxtaposition of those two words. And I think that's true. I think for me, I've been surrounded by a community. I've had resources that I can use and reach out to when I've had a traumatic experience. This is Losing my father was certainly not the only trauma that I've had in my life. I certainly, got fired from a job, basically, laid off from a job. I had breast cancer when I was 54.
Mm.
Uh, Thankfully, I'm a survivor of 19 years from that. Um, but the key for me has been having a daily spiritual practice.
Mm.
And it may not necessarily be sitting in a chair praying with my eyes closed. It might be an awe walk, a
Mhm.
meditation, a walking meditation. I've also, over the years, been connected to several women's groups, and there are some that meet almost every week. A meditation group, a group of women that started out practicing meditation, and now it's just we're all older and we're just kind of supporting one another through this aging process. And then an Emmaus reunion group. I don't know if you're familiar with the Walk to
Mhm.
Emmaus, but it's a spiritual renewal program through the Methodist Church. It's called different things through different religious groups, but it's a time of connecting with others who are interested in deepening their spiritual journey. And then after this 3-day weekend, you form groups. And I've been to keep focused on the presence of God in your life, to talk about joys and concerns. And I've met with a group of women since the early 90s, almost on a weekly basis, to talk about the times we've had the most joys in our weeks, our call to discipleship, when our faith has been tested, and then our prayer concerns. So it's been very communal. That's been important. So there's the individual personal growth through therapy and spiritual direction. There's a lot of individual internal work that I think one needs to do. At least that's been my experience. But there's also the community aspect of it, and church and different groups that I've been a part of that have been so instrumental. And I can't say enough about the support Randolph has given me over the years for going off on retreats and doing these studies. And, the spiritual directing training has a fee, and, there's been a lot of time that I've spent doing that. So that's been important.
Yeah, so I love your love story with your husband, like goals right there. I love it. Um, and so I heard a couple of things. So anybody that's wanting to bring more joy into their life and lean into that, I heard community, you have a strong family. I heard like living now instead of waiting until tomorrow. Um, I know that that's not available to everyone. Are there any other things that you would suggest that someone try and lean into if they wanted to try and cultivate that spirit of joy or their spirituality in general?
Well, I highly recommend the Book of Joy, first of
Okay.
all. It has a whole section of the book of joy practices, but it also talks about, different pathways to joy. And
Mm.
certainly, we find joy in nature. We find joy in family, and grandchildren and kids. I find joy in art, in music, and just being present, going to a museum. Those
Mhm.
are, particular, and it's going to be different for everybody as to what can bring you joy. But those are just some of the things that can do bring me joy. And certainly having retreats,
Mhm.
times away, are can bring joy. I think also there are some of the pathways to joy are things like perspective. I look back in my life and I can see the abundance. I can see that I was able to, with help, work through situations.
Good
I can
exercise.
see the presence of God. So there's the historical perspective. Certainly, if you're younger, you may not have that, although there are a lot of old souls who are young
Yes.
who've had a lot of trauma, and
Hmm.
that's one of the reasons. So they have that perspective. But humility, humor, watching funny movies, reading funny books, laughter, I mean, that can bring a lot of joy as well. And then I think, and just acceptance of the way things are, not in a resigned way, but in a
Yes.
way of what do I have control over? I
Hmm.
don't have control over the political climate. I have control over how I respond to that.
Yes.
I can be socially active. I can certainly be in prayer,
Mm-hmm.
and I can do the things that can fill me with joy so I can smile at the cashier. I can
Yeah.
uh, chit chat with my neighbor while we're out walking.
Yes.
I can do small things which lead to greater things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that leads to me being more forgiving, me being more compassionate, more generous and
Mm-hmm.
kind. And I think compassion and generosity are and being kind to myself,
Yeah.
self-compassion. That's something kind of new for me. Is
Hmm.
I was always pretty harsh on myself, but
Interesting.
learning to lighten up on myself. And therefore, guess what? I lighten up on other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard that in your conversation that there's a lot of self-reflection. And then through your stories, I heard that through that self-reflection and growth, you're able to be more present and give more to other people because you've cultivated that with yourself. That's
That's
interesting.
exactly right. It's not to be self-absorbed and, oh, I just hold all my joy for myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
No, it's to be turning out, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's a
I think
springboard to giving back.
it's so important. I started off by saying that we have so much trauma that's going on in today's political climate and just in society in general. But thinking about it and framing it that way, that there are moments that we can have joy, but making sure that we are putting that out into the world. And so when you think about that, it could really challenge the trauma, right? So if we can just be more present, more joyful, more laughing and being with our sense of community, that could particularly offset all of the trauma that's happening. It to some extent, it's still going to happen.
So,
We're
yeah.
not gonna-
And, I'm going to keep up with the news, but I'm going to
Yes.
moderate that. I'm not going
Hmm.
to spend all day, every day on the computer looking at the latest, chaotic story that,
Right.
no, I'm going to spend so, much of my time kind of cultivating
Hmm.
that joy and that a sense of wonder and awe in the world. I
Hmm.
mean, just walking around our neighborhood. I
Yeah.
mean, it's spring is in, full bloom. And that is just makes me smile and makes me happy. Now, I want to say, I don't think we should bypass trauma. We should not bypass anything emotionally that we need to deal with. This is not a cover up. Joy is not a cover up. It is we need to deal with the suffering. We need to deal with whatever trauma is there. That's why I highly recommend therapy and spiritual direction and anything pastoral counseling, any ways for you to begin to process that and deal with that. And there's specifically great therapeutic methods for dealing with trauma in particular. But even in the midst of that, I think we can take joy breaks. We can
Mm.
go look at
I
the
love that.
sunset. We can watch this. I love the sunrise
Yeah.
in our neighborhood. I
Mhm.
love being at the beach. Some people love the mountains. I'm a beach person. But whatever, I'm sitting watching the birds and just in my garden. Wow, I haven't even mentioned my garden. That brings me so much joy.
Mhm.
And you've got to come over and see the garden. It's
Well,
fantastic.
and bring a basket so that I can take some things.
Absolutely. Well, there's nothing like digging in the dirt with your
It's
hands to
true.
connect you with what's important. And
Yeah.
that's the whole thing, is what is really important, what
I think
matters.
I'm not an outdoor person. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm not a fan of nature, but there is something about gardening that brings me joy. I love it. So, and also thank you so much for clarifying the trauma and the joy and how important both of those aspects are. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to just ask you another question. You may mention that you were a little burned out or tired of the mental health aspect, but as you continue with your story, I see that there are elements of that in the spirituality. And so I can say that I'm a big fan of therapy. And it is usually the patient that will bring or open the door for that conversation. I do think that it's important to cultivate your spirituality with mental health. And even though you said that you're tired of it, I can still see that it's in there. And maybe it's because it's your core and that's just what you know. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I do too. I think obviously the skills it takes to be a therapist are part of being a spiritual director
Mm,
or a any kind of helper.
yes.
Someone who has compassion, has a willingness to be present with, listen, and to walk with someone, regardless of what they're dealing with, whether it's a mountaintop joyful experience or the depths of despair and grief and loss.
If
Uh,
our
just
someone listening wants to learn more about how to connect with a spiritual companion or guide, how would they be able to do that?
just Google spiritual directors in Austin, Texas, and it'll bring up
Mm,
a list of people who are trained to do spiritual direction.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to put some links in on the show notes. That's fascinating. So before we close out, I want to obviously thank you. I've always wanted to talk. I love talking to you. Cheryl and I sometimes I'm walking and she's riding her bike and we stop and she always seems to be there when I need her, when I'm going through maybe a valley or something and she's able to pull me out of that. So I always appreciate you. I thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to connect and you were in my life. So thank you so much for that.
Well,
Um,
thank you. And you're always there at the right time for me too.
thank you.
I need you have a radiant smile and a hearty laugh, just like your mama. I love being in your presence. And yes, we've had some tearful moments together, but you've come into my life at the right time, at the time God wants you to be here, I'm sure.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's really nice of you. Well, we're going to close out, but I'm going to ask you a question. This is the last of it. It's called Well, Since You Asked Me. And I believe that you were really active, like in 2020 with going out in the protest. And are you as active? Have you pulled back or how are you showing up to, I don't know, express some of the concerns that you have with what's going on?
I have been a lot less active. Well, I still write and call,
Mm,
that
yes.
kind of social activism. But the last rally I would have gone to, but we were out of town. I
Mm,
will still do protests.
okay.
That still feels like a calling because that gives me joy. I mean, to be
Mm,
with other people who
yeah,
are
the community.
also have this, yes, and that community and also focused. It helps me think, okay, I can do this. This is something I can do. So I will definitely continue to do that kind of thing, as long as I'm physically able to do that.
Yeah.
My main focus has been spiritual, and it is this training. We were advised not to take on anything extra during this training, but
Right.
that's about to come to an end. And I will probably reconnect with the Mainer Mental Health Group
Mm,
and the Mainer Wellness Group because I think they're doing really good stuff, and I heartily support them, if not in my with my presence, with my financial support during the times I've been away. But I think there's all sorts of things we can do, and I'm a big believer in doing it in community.
I love that. I haven't thought about it that way. I have not done any protests this time. I've kind of tapped out. But when you frame it in the form of like it is a way to connect, I have to reevaluate that. So that's very, thank you for sharing that.
Of
Well,
course.
we are at the end, so I want to wish you a happy Easter. Have fun with your granddaughter. I know she's going to be
Hmm.
spoiled, so that's good.
Always. This is
Yes,
a grandparent's prerogative.
I
Yes.
know. You guys are so different than when you were the mother. It's such an interesting dynamic. But I appreciate you. I wish you well, and I will see you in the neighborhood.
Yes. And give your mother my love.
I will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of Well Since You Asked Me. I hope this conversation left you with something to think about, something to question, or maybe even something to share. I would like to thank our executive producer, John Dunson, audio and video technician, Ryan Sexton, and graphic designer, Ellen Jacobs. If you enjoyed today's session, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and spread the word. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep asking the questions that matter. Bye.